Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, this morning I got up, so ready to tweet out the podcast, the Morning Scoop podcast link, as I always do. I sat down on my computer after I got the kids breakfast and all kind of stuff. Sat down on my computer, all ready to tweet it out. Opened up the Buckeye Scoop site, and it was the Bill Green chat. And I was like, oh well, I'll just look at the Bill Green chat real quick before I do the podcast link, and just got completely sucked into the Bill Green chat and was reading that for 45 minutes, an hour or something. And then, oh yeah, the podcast thing. And I went to Twitter, and you had already tweeted out the podcast link with a very sarcastic note about something just an offhand comment I made at the end of the podcast with meaning nothing. And so I just want to let you know I appreciate you promoting my content. Thank you.
Yes, I laughed. I enjoyed the show. First of all, it was with Zaid Hamden, former Buckeye defensive tackle, who was in the transfer portal, went to James Madison. But the best part of a really good show was afterwards. You say for more great content like that or something to that effect. Like you called the show great. First of all, you said that, and like if you like great content like I just gave you, then try BuckeyeScoop.com for more great content like the great content that I just gave you.
You just changed the name of that podcast to "You're Welcome," by the way.
Yes, maybe that's how you ought to end it. After well, thank you, the guest. And you are all welcome out there. But yes, it was a good show. Very, very interesting. Let's just start off with that because we all have questions about the transfer portal. It's very mysterious. Nobody knows where it is. Like, how did it start? Nobody knows. Who are the scientists? Was it NASA? But so explain, and I'll tell people, go ahead and go listen to Thursday morning's Morning Scoop. But for those who haven't yet, I was blown away by how the contacting takes place with this entire transfer portal. How does it work?
Well, this is one of these shows where a lot of times I'm doing these shows and it's like, well, I've already read the article this is based on, so I already know all the answers to the questions I'm asking. This one was one I've had on my list for like months, how does this actually work if you are a player? So I was like genuinely interested in like how this actually works. And I was right with you. It was like, oh, this must be a very formal process. And it's just like, no, you just kind of put your name in there and you don't have to put a ton of information in. You just kind of put your name in, submit some paperwork, 48 to 72 hours later, boom, you're in this portal. And you basically you put it in there, and then most of the contact is just done through Twitter. You just tag the NCAA portal account or, NCAA transfer portal Twitter account, and they'll retweet it, and then coaches will see that, and then they will contact you based on the fact, oh, look, this guy's in the portal. This is one of these things that seems like they should be like this a very formal process, and it's just like, oh no, just the NCAA transfer portal is basically file some paperwork and then slide into my DMs. That's essentially it. Which is it doesn't seem like that's how it should work, but it is apparently working. It worked for Zaid. He just landed at James Madison University, which is an FCS powerhouse, and they're playing for a spot in the FCS national championship game on Saturday. So he's found himself a nice new home, and obviously it's working for other people as well.
Yeah, because I'm thinking you put a post on the message board like, hey, you guys have any questions about the transfer portal? Go and put them here, and I'll ask them. And I'm thinking, well, I'm sure the contact is maybe it's like a message board or like an inbox where you just, your name gets put in and now coaches have a way to contact you. And I was just blown away by the fact that, yeah, you sign a piece of paper, you give it to the university, then they'll go ahead and it gets uploaded, within 2 or 3 days. But some guys, once they sign it, they just go to Twitter and say, hey, I'm entering the transfer portal. And that's how the process begins. It seems like if we're going to use Zaid Hamden as the example on how it generally goes, it's like you enter the transfer portal and then you just go to Twitter and wait for the DMs and check your phone and there's some, you're reaching out to, as he said, reaching out to his high school coaches and things like that. But very old, I don't know, like wild, wild west, almost a feel to it.
Well, and you can see when there's not like a real structure to it, you can see how there are people who kind of fall through the cracks there. Because, you look at NCAA basketball and it's like I don't know what the exact number is, but it feels like about 40% of the sport is in the transfer portal right now, and they can't all land somewhere. So when you have something like that, you can see how people absolutely fall through the cracks in a situation like that. One thing he did say was Ohio State's coaching staff has been super, super helpful for him. I think he's not someone who was going to be starting this year or anything. He came to Ohio State as a walk-on and he played some, but didn't play much last year just because of the wonky season. But, he played in a few games in 2019. It was very, very well liked and respected in the program. And it was very much like a, wish you the best, like, let us know what we can do to help kind of thing. And, I think that having coaches like that on your side is probably a huge asset in terms of finding a good spot to land and having, if you are a coach of an FCS team and Larry Johnson, who is viewed as something close to a deity in the defensive line coaching community, is giving the stamp of approval to a player and a guy who's had 3 years of coaching under you, like that probably goes a long way to making you an appealing person. But there's also that weird psychology thing where people only want something after other people want it, after they see that other people want it. He was in there for a while and didn't have any offers, and they got an offer. And as soon as he had an offer and tweeted out the fact that he had an offer and put, tagged the transfer portal, and the transfer portal retweeted it, then all of a sudden, like, oh, boom, 2, 3, like a couple more offers came in right away. So yeah, it's very interesting how that works. But again, like it is a weird process, very informal for what it is, but I guess it works.
Yeah, and as the teams are looking at it, they have the database of all of these players and information. Although I do remember, like, the first year talking to somebody who had access to it, they're like, there was no way to like sort via position.
Is that important? Is that something that coaches would want to do? That seems like a fairly basic function that, like, just click the header at the top of the column. Seems like that might be a pretty easy thing to build in. But
no, that's NCAA, man. Maybe in about 8 years they'll have something. Put it in a spreadsheet or something like that.
Once the NCAA figures out how they can make money off of it, then it'll be a feature in there.
Yeah, there you go. So let's talk a little bit about the news of the week for the Ohio State Buckeyes. The last couple of days got a commitment from 3-star cornerback Ryan Turner out of Chaminade Madonna Prep in Hollywood, Florida. Number 34, actually, maybe he's a 4-star by now. I don't know. Number 34 corner in the nation, number 48 player in Florida, Tom, the number 380 player overall. But again, like the Kai Stokes thing, go back and look at the offers. And he's got Turner as Florida, Georgia, LSU, Miami, Clemson, Penn State. Jeff Hafley offered him and several others. And so, he's committed. He is now the third commitment from Florida for the Buckeyes, so that's good. Watching his highlights from Huddle.
Were you grinding film, Gerd?
Yes, I was. Dutifully watching 2 minutes and 20 seconds of film of just the good plays. It kind of reminds me of Devontae Smith from former Ohio State cornerback commit who signed with Alabama. Similar size, demeanor. A physical guy, can play outside or play in the slot. I think maybe the slot might be going for him. I don't know. What's your impressions, Tom? What do you think about this? Another cornerback commit.
Well, it's obviously a position of tremendous need for this team right now. They are still kind of digging themselves out of the hole that they dug themselves a couple of years ago with a couple of classes that just didn't pan out. And a couple of kids who flipped very late in the process. That takes a while to dig out from that. If you have a couple of years of misses and you can't kind of supplement things through the portal, and it sounds like they are trying to supplement things through the portal, and there's just not a good fit out there right now. So that is not, this is like when they had the offensive line shortage a couple of years ago. They were down to 12, 13, something like that, 12 scholarship offensive linemen, and a couple of them were like, yeah, he's probably not going to be someone who's a contributor. You can't just like magically fix that. You see that with like Penn State or USC after they got firebombed with NCAA scholarship restrictions. You see it on the lines. Like when you're thin there, it takes a while to build back up, because if you're shorthanded, you you can't just add 6 guys and they're all going to contribute the first year. Like that's just not a reasonable expectation. Corner is kind of the same thing. You're not going to have a guy who just steps in off the street and is just a starter with year one. It's not that's, this is not running back. You can't really do that. So it takes a while to build back up after you kind of have that shortfall. And so they have to bring in, they brought in some bulk last year with, I think, 6 guys in the class last year. They may have like 4 or 5 in the class this year as they try and build that back up, because they were able to do that in the offensive line room. Now the offensive line room is really one of the strengths of the team. Now they have to do it at corner. So, these 2 guys plus Jaheim Singletary, who we'll talk about in a minute, three Florida guys, that is going to go a long way to start, rebuilding those numbers.
And our young Mick Walker, spoke with Kai Stokes, defensive coordinator, former defensive coordinator at Armwood. He has since moved on, but spent many years with Kai Stokes. He told Mick that part of the recruiting process was was Ohio State telling Stokes, like, we're moving to more of a 4-2-5, so we need a lot of defensive backs. So that was a little interesting tidbit just from that it's almost like an investors meeting where you finally you get to hear what's coming out in a couple of years, like what's going on behind the scenes. When you talk to the coaches and the people involved in recruiting, you get that same kind of insight about, well, the coaches are going to move this way, and this is the way things are leaning. So the more and more defensive backs you can bring in, and the various roles, from the cover safety to the deep safety to the nickel back to the bullet. I mean, that conceivably that could all be one guy. You sign that one guy and we're like, well, he could play somewhere, and then you'll just figure out, like a Josh Proctor, like you just build, you grow him or shrink him to whatever you need from that position. And you find a versatile guy like Ryan Turner or Kai Stokes. And then, as you mentioned, the Jaheim Singletary, just the number 5 cornerback in the nation, number 13 player overall, 5-star guy who has been committed for a while. So now Ohio State has, as I said, 3 commitments from Florida. Could add more to that. Frankly, there could be more added to that. We'll see how many of them sign, because that's something you got to keep working on to get them signed. But if they do get these guys signed, it'll be the first time since 2020 that Ohio State signed a Florida player, and that was Legend Cavazos out of IMG, who's actually from Texas. And to go back even further, then the first actual Florida high schooler to be signed was Marcus Crowley in 2019, who came from an OSU pipeline that had produced Sean Wade and Tyreek Johnson. So you wonder, and I know for a fact, like, Ohio State reached out to like Randy Wade, Sean Wade's dad, and is like, we need to, Marcus Crowley is the guy that we're targeting now. And so there was like a relationship there. And if that wasn't the case, do they go the 2019 class and the 2020 class and 2021 class without a Florida player? And so just getting back into that Florida pipeline is huge for them.
Yeah, that's one of the most talent-rich states in the country, and it's also a very, very difficult place to recruit, because there are a lot of teams. You've got a lot of teams in state who are obviously right, the front and center for all of these kids every day. Georgia's right there. Alabama has hit the state of Florida very, very hard the last few years. There's a ton of competition there. I think that was, you go back to the 1990s. That was like this little secret in the recruiting world. It's like, well, if you go to Florida, there's a bunch of really good players there. And in the last 30 years, people have turned out people have figured that out. And, as people have figured that out, you've, I think, seen some of those Florida schools slide down the rankings a little bit. Florida State is not what Florida State used to be. Florida is not what Florida has been. Miami is not what Miami has been. And it's because all these other schools are coming in and taking some of that talent that they used to just be able to hoard, and just, they built the state of Miami thing and just kept all those kids home. Well, now Ohio State's coming down there, Alabama's coming down there, Georgia's coming down there, and it's not so easy. And all of a sudden, like, oh, well, now we can't do that anymore. Now what? And they have not necessarily all found their now what. But I did a little homework for this. So I recorded the Friday morning scoop early, talked to Bill Green already about that. So you can listen to that full conversation on Friday. But I saw this was on our list, and I said, all right, I'm going to ask someone smarter than me, because, Tony, as you know, I don't always get the opportunity to do podcasts with people smarter than me. So when I get to do something with someone like Bill, it's really an honor, and I really appreciate his insight on these types of things. And I said, okay, so what's the deal? Why are they all of a sudden in Florida having this kind of success? And he said, right now, like, it's Kerry Coombs. Kerry Coombs is a really, 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 really good recruiter, which is not really a surprise, but that's what he chalks a lot of it up to is Kerry Coombs. Because if you look, I mean, the three guys who are committed right now are all defensive backs. And then once you start getting some of those kids in, then there is a history of people in Florida coming to Ohio State and having very good careers. You maybe remember such players as Joey Bosa, Nick Bosa, and such. But you get a couple of them in, you start building those pipelines like you talked about with Marcus Crowley and Sean Wade and Tyreek Johnson all being from the same school. You start building those pipelines, and then it's a little easier. It's coaches talk all the time about going into high schools with the Ohio State logo on your polo shirt, like that opens a lot of doors that might not be open for other people. Having players from that area who have come up to play for you and had success, that kind of gets you through that next set of doors as well.
That's interesting because I completely forgot about that aspect. I would have just attributed it to Urban Meyer leaving. His last full class was 2018, and they signed 5 guys from Florida, including Teron Vincent, who was at IMG, but originally from Baltimore, where I just found out today he played for Biff Poggi, who was the father of a former Michigan player, and there was some Michigan talk early on in there. But so that makes a ton of sense now that you mentioned that Kerry Coombs goes on, and so does the recruiting, because even in 18 you had Tyreek Johnson in there. 2017, Marcus Williamson and Isaiah Pryor, both from out of state but at IMG, but Sean Wade was part of that. These defensive backs, 2015, Damon Arnett out of Florida as well. So that makes a lot of sense. That's very interesting. Tom, for the first time in show history, you've impressed me with something you've brought to the show.
Well, I mean, you have to remember, this is why we like having access to people like Bill who really know what they're talking about. And Bill talked about the fact that he has like fantastic sources within some of the really top 7-on-7 programs in South Florida. And if you listen to Friday's Morning Scoop, you'll hear him tell some funny stories about, past players and, the Miami area guys and their evaluations of non-Miami area Florida players. And they have some thoughts. And you and I got to go to a South Florida Express practice while we were down for the national championship game. And I remember listening to some of those coaches talk, and it's like, oh yes, I know exactly the tone and delivery of their thoughts, and I think they're usually right, but they're usually pretty pointed as well. So, but yeah, he had some very interesting things to say. You'll have to listen to Friday's Morning Scoop to get all of that. Yeah, it does make sense, because I mean, there are certain areas of the country where you're going to go to get certain players. Like Ohio produces a lot of pretty good linemen. That's a good area for linemen. Florida, you get a lot of the skill guys, a lot of your wide receivers and your cornerbacks and that kind of stuff come from Florida. So it makes some sense that that's where you're going for that. And, the fact that you have Kerry Coombs there, I mean, there was a noticeable dip when we went from Kerry Coombs to Taver Johnson. And that, that is part of the hole that they're still kind of digging out of.
Yeah. And they're going for as much quality and quantity as they can. Florida has been very instrumental. And I went through and, Urban always signed at least one guy from Florida. Jim Tressel only had one class without a player from Florida, and that was 2003 when they signed about like 15 guys, and a bunch of them were from Ohio. And then I had to go back. I went back like 30 years just looking to see how many times did they not sign somebody. So 2003, maybe 1995, though, Brent Bartholomew was a true freshman on that team. I just don't know if he was a scholarship player.
I think he was. I mean, he was a scholarship punter. He was.
Yeah, I just didn't know if he started that way. I assume he did.
May I impress you and tell you that I think he was from Apopka, Florida?
No, that's just a guess.
I think he was. I think I hear Brent Musburger's voice in my head saying Apopka, Florida. So I think that's right. But if I'm wrong, then it's Brent Musburger's fault, and I apologize.
True. And then 1992. And so like basically 2003 and 1992 without a player from Florida signed, other than 2021 with Ryan Day. And if are we going to count IMG as you know?
Yeah, no, IMG kind of doesn't count for these purposes, just because, I mean, for people who don't know, that's kind of like, do you remember the old Cincinnati Academy for Physical Education? That's basically IMG Academy. It's like a boarding school for superior athletes. So they come from all over the country. So, you know, if you were a kid from like Tyler Gerald is on here, for example. Yeah. Tyler Gerald was from Portsmouth, Ohio, I believe. Grew up in Portsmouth, Ohio, lived in Portsmouth, Ohio, went to high school in Portsmouth, Ohio, then transferred to IMG for a year. It's like, well, you're still an Ohio kid. You're just going to high school and not in Florida for a year or two. So it's like, that doesn't really count. And I don't know if you said this, but Legend Cavazos, you weren't really counting him in 2020 because he was an IMG kid, but he's from Texas. So he's really more of a Texas kid than an IMG kid.
Yeah. But like Malik Barrow, he would count because he's originally from Florida, but then also went to IMG. So that's where you have to kind of parse a little bit. So that's like, I couldn't find a 2-year gap with no Florida players. And so it certainly doesn't look like that will be the case. So it seems like there would be no 3-year gap for sure with what they've got committed, and you would expect them to sign. And so now we're talking like pipelines. I don't know that there's been a more important out-of-state pipeline for Ohio State than Florida. And I probably should have gone back and looked at the 68 team to see if they're, like how important was Florida back then? Because 2002, you needed Chris Gamble to win that national championship. 2014, you certainly needed Joey Bosa to win that title. And Jeff Hireman wasn't bad either. But just all of the, there's so many guys from Florida. And when you say, like, who is the best Buckeye from Florida, you're going to have a bunch of different answers. And we may have even talked about this before. Whether it's like Santonio Holmes, Ryan Shazier, Michael Jenkins, who for a while was the all-time receiving yardage leader, Lydell Ross, all of these different names that you can throw out there who have a huge Ohio State history. Steve Bellisari, Greg Bellisari, a number of different guys, Nate Sally,
Yeah, I mean, that is a state that I think people who right now are looking at Florida and thinking this is Florida. Florida has always been this. It's like, no, Florida has not always been this. I mean, you've had some major population shifts over the last several decades where, the census data just came out and it's like, yes, look at the number of electoral votes Florida used to have compared to the number of electoral votes Florida has now. Like that tells you there has been a significant demographic shift from places in the northeast down to Florida. There is a reason that there are a lot of you see a lot of Mets and Yankees hats down in Florida. It's like, well, it's all the retired Ohio snowbirds and New York snowbirds and all of that. So, but as that has grown, as the state has grown, I mean, go back to the 1970s. Florida State and Miami were nothing in football, like nothing in football. Steve Spurrier won the Heisman in the 60s. And then it was just like, okay, like Miami was nothing. Florida State was a former women's college that was, basically didn't have football in any meaningful way until Bobby Bowden got there. Miami basically didn't have any kind of meaningful football until Howard Schnellenberger got there in the 80s. And just as that population grew, then you started to see those teams kind of follow along. So I'm going to scroll back when you're talking. I'll scroll back and pull up that 1968 roster. But my guess would be there's maybe one kid from Florida, but probably not, because you have a lot of those who are, that's the era when you go through the rosters and there's a lot of kids from like small towns in Ohio, or a lot of, you go through and it's like, there's like 15 kids from Cleveland in the Cleveland suburbs or Youngstown in the Youngstown suburbs. As those areas have kind of shrunk a little bit and people have moved away, you see fewer kids there. But that's generally where you had a lot of that makeup then. And, recruiting was not nearly the national phenomenon that it is now.
Yeah, I actually just pulled up the 68 roster and I was looking at it. There's only 12 kids from out of state, 12 kids. There are only 12 80-year-olds from out of state on that team. And really, as you like, the way it's listed, if there is no state listed with the city or town, it's Ohio. Yeah. It's just assumed. So like the only times the state is listed is when it's, out of state. Everything else is just Poland, Springfield. And it's like, you're not going to tell us which Springfield? There's like 80 of them. Like, no, it's just assumed that if there's no state, it is all Ohio. And, but yeah, that's something that has grown. So looking at it, I think you can almost claim that maybe what constitutes a pipeline? Like, I guess, is it at least one player a year over a stretch of time? Maybe we need to put some parameters on this, because I think you could say Ohio State now has pipelines in California, Texas, Washington, and of course they're working on Florida here, but North Carolina, they've got some guys and are recruiting more in 2022. Arizona, Georgia has, it's kind of gone back and forth, but Justin Fields still counts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pennsylvania, Idaho, of course, with Tommy Togiai. But the Pennsylvania thing, I was thinking, it's been a while since I've really gotten anybody from Pennsylvania. Then I was like, oh, yeah,
except for the two top 50 kids they got last year. Yes, other than them,
and then Julian Fleming, the year before that.
Yeah,
it's like they're skimming off the top of Pennsylvania, and like Ohio's offering protection to Pennsylvania high school football. Like, we wouldn't want to see anything happen to your football players, and then they just take the top ones and go.
Wouldn't want that big 33 to get any smaller, would you?
So that's probably what they'll like. Okay, just take our players and please let us just play Maryland from now on, because you're killing us.
Take our players and let us run on 4th and 5, and please, Don Urban,
and then tackle both the quarterback and the running back with just one player. We'd love to see it. So, I guess, what to you constitutes a pipeline? Because I think for me, it's like at least one player, on average, say like a player a year for like maybe 4 years in a row, something like that. I mean, where are you?
Yeah, that's probably about right. And I think there's also an argument to be made that it's more a high school or, region specific. So, Miami and Jacksonville are very different places and have very little in common. And I think you would say the same thing about like Houston and El Paso, or, they're getting a kid from Houston and then getting a kid from El Paso. Those two things, just because they share a TX at the end of their street address, like that doesn't really have anything to do with each other, because it's like, I don't know if you've ever tried to drive across Texas, but it is going to take a minute. Like, it is, 12 hours, 15 hours. It's some crazy amount of time to drive across the state. So, I think it's almost more of a program thing or an area thing, where like Ohio State had has a Jacksonville pipeline, where you have Sean Wade and Marcus Crowley and Tyreek Johnson and now Jaheim Singletary. And you build into, or you get back into the South Florida thing, where it's like, hey, all these kids who play for this 1 7-on-7 team, like a bunch of them are considering Ohio State. Like that's what it is more to me than just a state. But I know everyone just kind of talks about it in the state, kind of way. And maybe it's a little different for a state like Washington, where you don't have, 150 3-star players in the state of Washington like you do in Florida. You've got a much smaller group. So if you're an elite player in the state of Washington, you're probably bumping into all those same kids and, friends with all those same kids from all the camps and all the, whatever recruiting events out there. So, maybe it's a little different for a state that's a little smaller and produces a different level of talent. But yeah, to me, I think you have to have three players in 4 years, something like that. Cause you're not always going to have, the state of Washington did not produce an Ohio State scholarship football player after Kevin Griffin until G. Scott showed up. So that was like 1998 until 2000 until 2020. So, I don't know that I would lean on the state of Washington to continue to produce a 5-star prospect for Ohio State every single year. Like, it would be great. I'm sure Ohio State Mark Prantoni would be very, very happy if it did, but I don't know if that's something you can necessarily rely on. But, I think if you go through and you look at, you pick up these trends where it's like 2017 when they brought in Jeff Okudah and Baron Browning and J.K. Dobbins. And then, and then Texas has turned into that, where some of these guys are from some of the same areas where you've got Garrett Wilson, and then you've got Quinn Ewers, and you've got Caleb Burton, who is a wide receiver who is from literally the same high school as Garrett Wilson. It's like, okay, that is more of a pipeline to me, where it's kind of guys from the same basic area. And now I'm forgetting where Baron Browning was. So Baron Browning may have been from a very different part of Texas than he was in Houston. I was going to say Houston, but well, they're both in Texas, so we're probably both right. Yeah, but
didn't you just say?
Listen, if you're gonna argue with me about contradicting myself on this podcast, sir. But yeah, I mean, if you look at Ohio State, like they're pulling a lot of kids from that like Austin area right now. You know, that you see a lot of kids from that Lake Travis program. You know, Garrett Wilson, Matthew Baldwin, you know, Quinn Ewers, I think from that Austin area, basically, generally. Caleb Burton, like it's all kids from that same basic area where they're going to be, you know, seeing each other on the field, seeing each other at these camps, all that kind of stuff. And you start building relationship. And then, you know, when you are Caleb Burton and someone like Garrett Wilson has come from the high school that you now attend, he just transferred there. But, you know, I'm guessing you're hearing a lot about Garrett Wilson and seeing a lot about Garrett Wilson. And it's like, hey, that looks like fun, catching touchdowns and playing for national championships. Like, I think I would like to do that. That just keeps that program a little more front of mind than it would be otherwise for just another kid somewhere else in the state of Texas.
Baron Browning, Fort Worth, Texas.
Wow. So that's right in the middle of Odessa and Houston. So I think, you know, on average, we were exactly correct. Good job.
Yeah. But you are right. Like, there are differences from one end of the state to the other, and sometimes even one end of the city to the other. I mean, like, if I accidentally show up in Dublin, like, I feel very out of my realm. Like, I should not be here. The people know I shouldn't be there. And so I am quickly ushered out. So then
Kirk is that way too.
Yeah. So
it's okay because he makes those jokes too.
Yeah, exactly. See, that's a good one. But then what's the next pipeline? And I think the Michigan pipeline is probably my answer, but it's been there used to be something there, then it went away, probably because Kerry Coombs went away. And now that you bring him back, maybe that's something that gets reestablished. Because I don't know, like, where are they missing? Alabama? That wouldn't be bad.
I mean, and you're getting into states where they haven't pulled players for a long time. I mean, Alabama, you get into the deep
Louisiana.
South, and it's very hard to pull kids out of Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi. Those are just, you know, when I do the most recent Buckeye from, you know, each state, a lot of those are states where it has been longer than you think. I think Alabama, I think there was one player they've pulled out of Alabama, and that was Dante Wheat, who was in like 1983. And there was some question whether Dante Wheat ever actually enrolled at Ohio State. He showed up in the media guide, but may have not actually enrolled at Ohio State. So they may have never had a player from the state of Alabama, if I recall correctly. But, you know, you have certain areas where it's easier to pull a kid out. And you've got certain areas where it's just like everyone grows up wanting to play for this or play in this conference. And so, and you know, Texas also has a lot more talent than the state of Alabama does. Like, Alabama produces, we talked earlier about the, you know, certain states that produce certain stuff. Like, you want a defensive tackle, like go down to Sweet Tea country. Like, you will find yourself a defensive tackle. But, you know, Houston or Texas, you have just so many more players that you're more likely to pull a guy or two out of there every year, rather than, you know, the, you know, however many, you know, 10 4-star kids in the state of Alabama, like, or not, maybe not even that many. You know, the 30 in the state of Texas, like, yeah, you got many more chances to pull someone out of there.
And I didn't even put like New Jersey on this list, which has kind of fluctuated a little bit, but Ohio State has certainly had success there. The depth of these states, like Florida, Kai Stokes right now is the 75th ranked player. I think we are going to see some wild fluctuations with these rankings because coaches are finally getting a chance to see players so they can offer them. That bumps up their rankings because scouts are like, recruiting services are like, well, okay, these players are good, so we need to reevaluate them. And then also the recruiting ranking, people are actually getting to see players again in camps as well. So the number 75 player in Florida will probably be the number 15 player or 25 player at some point. And even back in 2020, the number 50 player in Florida signed with Alabama. A cornerback was the number 296 player overall, number 50 in Florida, but top 300, which is insane to me. And that's why I think it's to tie it all back together. That's why it's good to get back to Florida.
Yeah, I think that is a spot where you're not going to, make your living in the state of Florida. We've talked about this with a bunch of other states. You're not going to make your living in the state of Texas. You're not going to build your class around Texas kids. But if you can be in Texas and pull out a couple kids every year, and you can be in Florida and pull out a couple kids every year, and you can be in Georgia or California, or pick your spot around the country. You go back and it's like, oh, any of those states, like think back and it's like, oh yeah, they've had some really crucial players and past teams that are from those states. You're not going to live in, you're not going to make your living there. You're not going to build your class with 10 kids from Texas. But if you can pull one or two kids from Florida every year, that makes a big difference, because, that's, again, like there are different parts of the country that are better at producing on average certain types of players. You need all the different types of players. That's an important, write that down. That's good advice. You call you coaches, write that down. You need all these different types of players to actually make a football team. You cannot build an entire team out of punters. #B1G.
Right, exactly. And some states, as you said, give you different options. Like you don't go to Dress Barn for tomatoes. Just like you don't go to Florida. Anyway, Tom, let's just end the show. Do you have anything else? Is there anything else you want to touch on before we go?
No, I think we're good. I have already plugged Friday's morning scoop, so my work here is done.
Yes. Anything else besides that?
I just said my work here is done. Obviously, no. Obviously, I have nothing else to share today.
No, definitely check out Thursday's morning scoop because it's informative. It's interesting. Zeta Hampton is great. If you think you love Ohio State, Zeta Hampton loves it more than you. I'll just put it that way as he goes on to talk about what's next for him. But check that out. And of course, anytime Tom has Bill Green on, an informative person, a smart person, yes, we should plug the shows with the smart people because, again, you only get one of them here, as you know. So that will go ahead and do it. Thank you all for listening. Make sure to check out all of the podcasts on this Buckeye Scoop Network because there's a bunch. We got stuff for everybody. And just you can check that out. Go to BuckeyeScoop.com. There's a menu on the left for the podcast. It'll take you to our Spreaker page. And there's, more like 10, something like that. I don't even know anymore. But options for everybody. Check it out. And then, of course, if you're not yet a member, I would suggest it. We're heading for June, which is going to be the craziest June you've ever seen, bar none. And it'll be a good time to be on the Ask the Insiders message board. So that will do it for this week. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you guys later.